Today I'm going to talk about the question formulation technique and how I've used it and am discovering that it is a diagnostic for us as teachers. In science, we all know the curriculum. If you start with the first overall expectation, grades 1 to 12, STSE, science, tech, society, and the environment. And what we're looking at is the relationships and interactions between STSE. We as teachers read the curriculum and think of a provocation that is going to inspire our students to want to learn more. This is the why behind the unit that we're looking at. The provocation can either be through an image, like the one that I have here, or a statement. If you're using an image, follow up with an observe and infer process. Step number 1 of the question formulation technique. In small groups, 3 to 4 students, a large sheet of paper, 1 black permanent marker. 1 student is responsible for recording. Our students are experiencing safety because they're in a small group of their peers. They get to practice asking questions out loud. Our other students in the group are able to engage because if I hear a question from another student, it's safe for me to now ask my question. The rules for the question formulation technique are there on the slide for you. I tend to cut off at peak engagement. As a teacher, I have the time now to walk around the room, listen to the questions my students are asking, and I can start to notice when there's a couple of students that start to disengage. When they disengage, I move on to step number 2. Step number 2 is to mark your questions as O for open or C for closed. I don't give my students the definition of open and closed questions. I ask them for their definitions and I record their answers on the board, or we just have a dialogue about it. What is really important in the groups, I've had students that have defined a question as O/C. If that's what their group has negotiated and come up with, that's great. What's important here is the dialogues and conversations that they're having at their table groups. The third step is to change a question from open to closed or closed to open. In the beginning, I may ask them just to do 1 or 2 questions. As we become more proficient, I might add in a few more expectations. What I want my students to know is that there is a time and a place for both open and closed questions. And sometimes we need to know the answer to a closed question before we can go on and ask more opened questions. So there is no judgment, and this makes it really, really safe for our kids to ask what they feel that they need to know to move on with their learning. I ask the groups then to go back and identify their top 3 questions. And I change the topics around. It might be, what do you need to know before you leave the room today? Or what questions do you need to explore further? Or is there something that is just nibbling away at you and you need to really understand before you can move on? So in their groups, pick your top 3 questions. I record the questions from the student groups. I'll ask each group for their first question, their second question. The reason I'm asking them to have a collection of 3 questions, if there's another group that has a similar question, go ahead, let's move on to your second question then. So we have always a backup of questions that we're interested in learning about. I don't assign specific questions to students. I allow them to pick the ones that they're interested in, so that students are asking and answering questions based on the teacher provocation, which is curriculum related. I have found increased student engagement because they're able to identify the piece of learning that they're interested in following through with. I've also included here how it's been used in other classes.